Stay to the end and you'll leave with a scandalously simple meter that humiliates most performative ferocity. Did your roar increase protection for someone who wasn't you this week? Not applause, not follower spikes, protection. The problem I'm cutting open tonight is the lion's roar problem. The gap between aesthetic ferocity, fang emojis, wrathful masks, thunder in the mic, and actual courage, risk with receipts, heat that lands in outcomes, a body that pays a price for truths it carries. We imported lion's roar from sutras and tantra as the sound of uncompromising dharma. Then the internet turned it into a filter. We learned to perform temperature with adjectives and mistake them for weather. Aesthetic ferocity worships volume, velocity, and vibe. Real courage worships nouns, consequences, and repair. Aesthetic ferocity sells identity, a mask that says, I'm fearless, because it never meets the invoice. Real courage is unphotogenic, meetings that start late because harm was named, budgets that change, power that rotates and hates doing so. The problem isn't anger. Anger is an honorable animal. The problem is unpaying anger, heat that bills others and calls it dharma. That's not lion energy. That's theater with carnivore makeup. Across traditions, the lion's roar was never about decibels. It was about non-substitutability, a clarity that cannot be replaced by flattery, a stance that remains when charisma evaporates. In Vajrayana, wrathful compassion is surgery, precise, brief, expensive to the surgeon. In our feeds, wrath is smoke machine, ambient, endless, profitable to the venue. If your roar cycles the crowd and leaves the room unchanged, you're not a lion. You're a foghorn pointed inward. Tonight we will separate ferocity as costume from ferocity as competence. Expect offense. Expect me to ask where your heat lands, who cleans its mess, and why you call that cleanup less spiritual. Expect me to prefer the person who whispers a clause number over the person who shouts a slogan. At the end, I'll give you one sentence that turns off most fake lions mid-roar. I'm silent flame. Take a breath. We're about to find out if your fangs are functional or just white. Aesthetic ferocity has three parts: the stance, the stage, and the substitution. The stance is permanent readiness, shoulders high, jaw set, conclusions preloaded. It feels like integrity because it never negotiates. It is actually premise addiction, the thrill of certainty unmoored from fresh contact. The stage is valence amplification, blood red thumbnails, cadences that sprint, a camera angle that makes any sentence sound like Judgment Day. The stage earns the stance attention. So the stance never has to earn accuracy. The substitution is the trick. We swap precision for charge and pretend no one will notice because charge is louder. People notice. They just don't argue. They unsubscribe. Or worse, they imitate. Where does aesthetic ferocity show up in spiritual spaces? In the grin that says crazy wisdom while logistics are on fire. In the direct pointing that points at everyone but budgets. In the wrathful deity cosplay that forgets the wrath is compassion's tool, not ego's license. In calls for truth-telling that mean, let me escalate without receipts. Aesthetic ferocity eats governance first. It cannot tolerate breaks. It calls oversight bureaucracy, transparency worldly, and injury projection. You can measure it by what it never names: process, authorizations, clauses, consent. Why is this seductive? Because velocity masquerades as depth on camera, because a room starved of protection will take any heat that promises to scare monsters, because many of us were harmed by polite cowards. Now we overcorrect with loud cowards. Also because rage feels clean for 12 minutes and expensive for 12 months, and online economies only pay for the first 12. The algorithm rewards edge, novel angles, sharper adjectives, faster cuts, and punishes the one skill courage cannot live without: waiting long enough to be accurate. True lion energy refuses substitution. It won't accept vibe where verb is needed. It takes the stage only to deliver a vector from problem to changed condition. It understands that real ferocity is not a mood, but a mapping, identifying leverage points, shouldering risk, closing loops. The performance ends when reality moves. Until then, you're decorating the cage. Courage is costly precision. It costs you, not only those around you. It has a direction. Heat flows toward harm with measurable intent, not outward toward attention with theatrical intent. And it ends in repair, not just catharsis. Let's pass. Cost. If your raw never risks money, access, status, or comfort, it's branding. Cost doesn't mean self-destruction. It means non-transferable pain. You pay something you can't bill to others. The awkward meeting, the loss of a donor who loved your glow but not your governance, the delay of a product because a worker said, "This isn't safe." Aesthetic ferocity creates invoices. Courage pays them. Direction. Heat without targeting is arson. Courage specifies nouns. It says, here is the policy, here is the clause, here is the person with power, here is the remedy. It refuses the abstract enemy that turns everybody into a villain and nobody into a defendant. It stays inside jurisdiction. Not everything is broken, but this is broken, and here's the lever we can actually pull. Repair. A roar that cannot become a fix is a tantrum in formal wear. Courage has an end game, not the applause of the purified, but the ordinary safety of the newly protected. You know you met courage when the room gets quieter afterward, not louder, when people sleep, when no one needs to update their personality to meet the new order. There is a fourth marker: short half-life. Real courage is episodic. It appears, burns clean, and leaves. Aesthetic ferocity is chronic. It must sustain heat or die. Chronic heat melts truth. It bleaches nuance, evaporates allies, and cooks the very thing it swore to defend. If your brand requires you to be mad daily, you are married to an enemy generator. That enemy will eventually be your neighbor, then your friends, then you. Wrathful compassion, think Mahakala Yamantaka Simhanada Avalokiteshvara, was designed as surgical energy, speed that cuts delusions glue when slower means fail. It's not a personality, it's a tool that borrows the body for a narrow task and returns it cleaner. When we rehearse wrath without emptiness, no self to defend, and without bodhicitta, no one to humiliate, we produce counterfeit wrath, the thrill of domination decorated as dharma. Trauma complicates this. Many of us learned protection as explosion because boundaries were never honored. Rage felt like the only door that opened. In spiritual spaces, that nervous system meets tantric imagery and misreads it as permission. Teachers, too often eager for edge, mistake arousal for insight. Crazy wisdom becomes an alibi for unexamined power. We flatten the entire path into my hot truth and call anyone asking for governance fragile. But if your wrath can't coexist with logs, budgets, grievance channels, consent protocols, it isn't wisdom, crazy or otherwise. It's old pain with incense. There's another counterfeit: performative bravery that never visits intimacy. The person who can excoriate institutions on stage but cannot apologize to a partner with nouns. The activist who can name every geopolitical harm but ghosts their team when feedback arrives. The monastic who roars at delusion but can't rotate the seat. Ferocity at scale without tenderness at hand is safe theatre. No one who matters could evict you mid-monologue. True wrath is boring on paper. It files, it timestamps, it documents patterns so the cut is clean and defensible. It knows that compassion with fangs never bites to feel alive. It bites to stop a bleed. If you're using wrath to generate a self rather than to end a harm, you will become addicted to your own sirens. And a lion addicted to roaring is just a noise. Sociology 101. Cheap signals are appearances that cost little to fake. Slogans, poses, emoji fangs. Costly signals are behaviors that are expensive to fake. Opening the books, removing yourself from unilateral control, putting timelines on promises, inviting independent oversight. Aesthetic ferocity is a cheap signal that poses as high cost because it feels risky. Risk is not about feeling, risk is about exposure to loss you cannot theatrically recover with a thread. The lion test is 3 questions. What did your roar risk? Name the asset, money, access, seat, timeline. If the answer is none, costume detected. What did your roar change? Name the lever moved, policy updated, person protected, process added, harm prevented. If the answer is awareness, suspect cosplay. Awareness without architecture is a parade. Who cleaned after your roar? If strangers did logistical labor you disdained, you outsourced courage. Real ferocity loves its janitors because it is one. Extend this to online speech. You say the unsayable. Did your targets have a path to reply that wasn't a dog pile? Did you link to a remediation route? Did you give a clock for review? Lions don't roar into vacuums. They roar inside procedures, so claws become claws, not gossip. A final marker, reversibility. Ferocity that can't retract is cowardice in a cape. Real courage leaves itself a path to update when new evidence arrives. That's not weakness, that's an immune system. If your identity can't survive being wrong on record, your roar is a hostage situation where truth negotiates with your brand. You cannot verify courage on a timeline. You verify it in a room. The temperature drops when heat is applied correctly. The shy speak. The reckless slow. The harmed see themselves in policy. The powerful feel watched and strangely relieved. Rooms are where nouns beat adjectives. Reels are where adjectives beat everything. Aesthetic ferocity optimizes for clippability. It compresses complexity into quotables, strips context, and decorates harm with rhythm. That's not evil, it's a medium constraint. But when the medium becomes the metric, rooms die. You get performances of courage with no carry capacity. Leaders who can roar cannot hire. Monastics who can scold cannot steward. Organizers who can trend cannot land budgets. The crowd senses this and begins to crave more roar to cover the gap. Soon, the coalition needs enemies to feel alive. The enemy supply chain never runs dry. It runs out of truth. Courage cashes out in boring places, red lines on documents, slightly improved grievance forms, a survivor's week of sleep, a mic check that catches the tremor in a new voice and waits. It's not that spectacle is evil. It's that spectacle is unbanked unless someone quietly deposits it in procedure. If your roar doesn't have a clerk, it's counterfeit. If your clerk can't speak without you, it's a cult. Ask the room question. Did courage make this space more available? Not more awake, not more inflamed, not more famous. Available, reachable after disagreement, breathable after truth, solvent after refunds. Rooms that can answer yes do not need to keep roaring. They hum. The hum is the sound of lions asleep. If you need an aesthetic, we all do, try this one. Soft voice, hard edges, open books. Soft voice because volume isn't proof. Hard edges because boundaries without enforcement are bedtime stories. Open books because secrecy is where fangs rot. This counter aesthetic looks tame on screen and terrifying in meetings. It says less and shows more. It refuses conceptual heroism in favor of auditable promises. Its symbols aren't skull cups and flames, they're version histories and rotating chairs. Its mantra isn't fearless, but under review. Its mudra is a pause with a pen. When this style fails, it fails reparably. When cosplay Ferocity fails, it fails spectacularly and then blames the audience for not clapping hard enough. None of this shames loud temperaments or blesses shyness. Some lions must roar to be heard over machines designed to drown them. Some harms need a siren, but the counter aesthetic asks for interoperability. Can your heat plug into governance? Can your eloquence compile into clauses? Can your charisma tolerate succession? If the answer is yes, your ferocity is not a costume. It's a tool that disassembles itself when the job is done. And yes, sometimes the only truthful roar ends a relationship, a career, a lineage, a platform. Lions do not fear endings, they fear performative continuations, the undead institutions that eat volunteers for brand maintenance. When the end is mercy, the roar is a lullaby no one will trend. I won't bless your fangs if they only bite the air. I won't shame your quiet if it moves a door. The lion's roar was never about being loud. It was about being answerable. Heat that can name what it touched, who it protected, and what it is willing to lose next time. If your ferocity can't publish its receipts, it's theatre. If your tenderness can't take a seat at the table where risk lives, it's sentiment. Courage is the marriage, tenderness that will invoice itself, ferocity that will shut up when the clause lands. So here's the sentence I promised, the one that turns off most fake lions mid-roar. Name the lever and the ledger. Lever equals what changes because of this heat. Ledger equals what it will cost you. If the room goes quiet, you just met a costume. If the room gets busy, you just met a lion. I don't need more brave-sounding feeds. I need more boring minutes where harm gets smaller and promises get older. Keep your aesthetic ferocity. Keep your skulls, your fonts, your rage reels. The future is built by those who can look power in the eye and ask for nouns until the heat has somewhere to live. If your roar can't carry a clause into a room and walk out lighter because someone else is safer, it isn't a lion, it's an echo. I don't hunt echoes, I hunt doors.